How do we live ancestrally in a modern world? Today's guest and I are going to break down this topic and so much more, so stay tuned. Welcome back to the Sarah Kleiner Wellness YouTube channel. Today, I am talking with Dr. Anthony Gustin, and we are talking about these topics that concern ancestral health and the fantasy a lot of us have. I definitely still have myself of kind of moving off grid, getting out of the modern life and all those harmful things that a lot of us experience in the modern world. How do we do this when we live in a city and we have a family? And there's just such a complex topic that we just wanted to break it down a little bit for people and talk about his journey and how he has really changed and learned over the years. So make sure that you're following him. All of his information will be down in the show notes for you. And before we jump into today's episode, I just want to thank a couple sponsors really quickly. Viva Rays is my go-to source for protecting my circadian rhythms. You can get 15% off of any of their products using the code YOGI, and you can find that linked down in the show notes. I use their glasses to protect my circadian rhythms before sunrise, after sunset, especially having young children. It's very important that I make sure my circadian rhythms stay strong so I have my best energy. They also have fantastic eye masks as well as low EMF headphones that you can use to listen to podcasts and shows like this. The second sponsor is Upgraded Formulas. They are my go-to source for making sure that my minerals are in balance. Now, most of us do have some sort of a mineral imbalance, and a lot of times it's a guessing game of adding this mineral, that mineral, adding more salt. But what if you add too much salt or not enough salt? So the hair tissue mineral analysis helps you take the guesswork out of that process. You can use my code YOGI12 or YOGI if you've already used that one before to save on that test. Make sure to check them out. And let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Super excited to have Dr. Anthony Gustin here today. Now, I've actually been following him for years and was super excited that he reached out to me to be on his podcast. So stay tuned for that. But of course, I had to have him come here to the show. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I was saying before I turn on the camera, I don't even know where to start. You have just such a long history and an amazing story. So let's maybe start from the beginning of like how you even got interested in the health space in particular.
Yeah, I was really sick when I was younger. Feeling like classic, typical Midwest, fat, sick, tons of health problems. My family had tons of health problems, and my extended family had even more health problems. It was just normal growing up. I didn't even know about it. And I think that this is one thing that I credit to the sort of ridiculous mainstream media we have, which glorifies beauty and attractiveness and things like that. Because I think that if there wasn't TV, if there wasn't the internet coming online as I was growing up, I wouldn't have any sort of awareness that that environment was not appropriate. It's sort of been like fish in the water type of thing. And so it was just sort of the quest of just, I guess, seeing like, even though I had really nobody around me that was living a healthy lifestyle, being miserable, feeling awful, depressed, angry, to like the whole gamut of things. And then just trying to figure out like, how do I fix this whole thing? And so that has basically been the journey of my life. And I think that as I've been seeking each part of that and trying to figure out the next step for myself, I've tried to help other people through that journey as I figured things out. And as you know, it never stops. And as soon as I think that like, oh, I've made it and I got it, you realize that there's just still more digging to go. And so that's kind of been the path that I've been on. And I don't even know if I consider myself an expert in really anything other than continuing to take one step forward and figuring out how to build a rich human experience. And I think that it has shifted a lot from the original quest of mastering physical health into now understanding like that is a tiny piece of the puzzle. And I think a lot of people get hung up on that, especially in the world we live in of trackers and lab tests and all this type of stuff. And we're able to quantify physical health better than anything else, but there's such a mental, emotional, spiritual, relational connection, like all of these things matter just as much, if not more, than just purely physical health. And then in physical health, there's an endless rabbit hole. And that's where I've spent a lot of my life is digging into that. But now I think that as I move forward, I realize that, again, the physical health is just one component of the experience of being alive as a human being. So yeah, the rabbit hole keeps getting deeper.
Yeah, I think a lot of us kind of start with the nutrition aspect of things because it's almost maybe one of the easiest or quickest things that we can fix. So I know that you have a lot of experience in that realm. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was the first thing that gave me a feedback loop of I can change my environment and my experience changes. I think as soon as you can teach people that and get them on that habit loop, they're kind of then walking their own journey, which I think is like a really magical point. And so a lot of the work that I've tried to do is focus on how can I change people's behavior to realize that they're in control of their own environment. We're locked in a zoo cage as human beings, we're like born in zoo cages, but you can open the zoo cage and you can get out and change your own environment. That's difficult, as we talked about when we recorded for my podcast. But that was the first thing that I did to change my own environment. And it was kind of the standard American diet to lean turkey breast on whole wheat sandwiches with light mayo kind of thing. But even going through that phase, like most people, if they do any sort of diet or have any intentional environment change with nutrition, generally find some positive outcome from a standard American diet.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that was when I was like 16. And I was really overweight at that point and lost a lot of weight just being active and eating more real foods than I had been eating. Like it was entirely like Tostitos, chips and dip, Pop-Tarts, cereal, like the worst imaginable standard American diet is like what I was raised on entirely throughout my entire life until I was like a teenager and was told by doctors like, oh, like look at your family. This is just a genetic thing. There's not much you can do. And I don't even remember what it was. Maybe just like seeing the marketing in the grocery store of like Lean Choice and Special K and things like that.
I think we must be about the same age because that was the same for me.
I just turned 35, so
okay, I'm a little bit older than you, but
yeah, it's just that that was the first step, and this is where I always try to have empathy of people. I try to like 99% of the food I eat now is bought from local farmers around me, no matter where I am, and I try to hunt my own food. And until recently, it was farming a lot of and like literally growing a lot of my own food. That took me 20 years. And I think that sometimes when people give recommendations, they go a little extreme. And I think some people do make choices really fast, but then a large subset of the population, it takes them a really long time to make some of these behavior changes. So that's what it took for me. It was 20 years. And so it was, the arc for me was very much that type of like whole wheat pasta, lean meats, things like that. And again, like that helped me quite a lot, but it didn't really get me to where I wanted to go. Figured out actually in undergrad, I was reading biochemistry textbooks and trying to figure out how to lose as much fat as possible and was doing ketogenic diet, like basically a very high protein, low calorie ketogenic diet. And it worked really well. Didn't know that, this is like 2006, 2007. And I didn't even know who like Volek and Finney were at this time. They were starting to put up information. So I was basically just using that, my friends and I figured out via looking through different mechanisms of like how we could lose fat. And then I got into, when I was in grad school, into more like a paleo, kind of classic paleo diet, which again was like very helpful. Then keto became more of a thing and research into that. And they started thinking about it at that point, less of a, this is the one way. And after that was like the third or fourth time, I'd like been like, oh, I'm actually just building a toolbox here. And starting to figure out some of the underlying principles of unarguable things with nutrition and food. And what I think that is now is that food should spoil. If you put something out on the counter and you can still eat it in a couple of weeks, is it food? I don't really think so. No. And I think that there's like supplements can be helpful for sure, but I think that this inarguable thing of real food spoils and it grows and it dies. Like food dies.
Right.
And if you're a living thing eating other things, you need to eat things that die. And this is where I don't understand the argument of the ethical argument for veganism, because plants are alive as well. I don't get how we have a morality superior of animals over plants. But
and as a farmer as well, the type of death that has to happen for even growing plants, correct?
it's a cycle no different than light and dark. I just I think that this is, again, looking at spiritual health, there's been a constant in human history for millions of years. There's been this focus and this belonging and this attachment through this inextricable cycle of life and death, which we've removed ourselves and have this illusion that we can play this, savior of death. And now we're at this point where the religion as a society is that we will live forever.
Right.
And we will stop death because we are that smart. And we're going to merge with the machines, and oblivion will cease to be. Right. And our egos will be saved forever. And so that mentality is really destructive. And these are some of the things that I've been digging into lately around just the spiritual significance that we have as a culture. And the physical health stuff is really challenging to get. But once you get it, there are different layers to these things. And I try not to over apply the naturalistic ancestral principles to this stuff, but nature doesn't get a lot wrong. So when you look at it from that perspective, it sort of makes sense in a lot of that light. And I'm happy to, and I'm always open to, even with food, for example, I have a sort of an open invitation to anybody of, hey, if you have an example of a food that we've created in a lab or fortified or whatever that's better than nature, let me see that, because I'm happy to integrate that and with what I'm doing or anything else like that. I just haven't seen an intervention we've made as humans that has been a net positive from what nature affords us.
Yeah. The whole lab grown meat thing is like a huge topic right now. And I've seen people actually be excited that there's such a thing as lab grown meat now. And it's kind of coming out of the plant-based community of like, oh, well, now we can actually have bioavailable protein. It's going to be good for us. And I'm like, oh no.
Yeah, it's not going to be healthier. It's not going to be cheaper. It's not going to be more ethical. It's not going to be more environmentally friendly. It is literally not better on any point if you actually look at where it's come from and how it's made. So that's pretty crazy. But to wrap it up, was going keto, try carnivore stuff. And again, less dogmatic and just more of a focus on what are the tools here in the toolkit and what can help people get to certain things. And I generally am sort of a sick person, and the fact I need to get in and be immersed into something if I want to talk about it or have an opinion about it. This is why I bought a farm and became a farmer. And for better or worse, again, I looked at a carnivore diet when it first came out, and I knew intuitively this is just looking at the amount of humans thriving throughout the world who don't eat that way. This can't, there's two things in opposition here. People saying they have such tremendous benefits from it, and then people thriving as humans not eating this way.
Right.
But I was interested, and so I got into that for a while, and that got me into farming. And I think about food very differently than I did even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I think about it more as connection to environment than I do about this thing that provides me just nutrients or carbohydrates or protein. This atomized, separate material thing, when really it's a transfer of energy and information. And these are some of the things that 10 years ago or 5 years ago, even hearing the way I talk about things right now, I would be like, bro, what happened? You're such a hippie now. And there's talk about all this woo stuff, but it's, I don't have great ways to communicate it yet, but there's a lot of people who are coming out with science about this stuff. I just really don't care about a lot of that anymore as much about mechanisms, research, data, et cetera. I think that a lot of that obsession with those metrics have put on blinders for us. And we now have a very difficult time looking outside of that box. Yeah. And if something doesn't have certain RCT backing it up, we cast it off as useless. And with that goes hundreds of thousands of years of wisdom.
Yeah.
And so not saying that data is bad. I think that looking at it from exclusionary point of view, if this is the only way we make decisions, is not as helpful as it could be.
Yeah, I agree. There's a point where it's great to have some scientific data, research, whatever, but you can't live and die by it, especially if you have, like, I feel like intrinsically we know things, like as humans, we know things, it's embedded in there. And we can, like you said, put the blinders on so much that we have to have a study for this, that, and the other. And I think it can be greatly to our detriment at the end of the day.
Yeah, again, it's not bad or wrong, but looking
Right.
at exclusively is not helpful. Like
Right.
there's just everything we know right now, we didn't know effectively 100, 200, 300, 500 years ago.
Right.
And we've been around for a long time.
Right.
And we've survived and thrived in different pockets for a long time. And so if we can thrive without these things, yes, they can be helpful. I mean, the way I think about it is like we're sort of like discovering the path back to rebuilding a natural environment, effectively what's going on.
Yeah.
We've taken our environment, we've destroyed it. And everything that we find now that's helpful is just restoring that natural environment. That's all that's going on.
Yeah.
And frankly, I got to a point of just being obsessed with some of these metrics and studies and outcomes and all this type of stuff. And then realizing it just wasn't making my life any like qualitatively any better.
Mm-mm.
And this is another reason of like, do I feel more vibrant? Do I feel more connected to my friends and my family? Do I express more love? Am I a better husband? Do I experience more joy? Like, do I have less suffering for it? Like, no, like turning my, like cold plunge to 54 degrees instead of 55 for 3. Like, it's just some of this stuff is, I'm so sick of it.
I am too.
Yeah. And it's kind of honestly led to a lot of, I've kind of disappeared from a lot of social media in public areas just because like the health space has kind of shifted entirely into must have facts and figures, must look at studies or else it's irrelevant. And if you're not, then don't even bother talking about this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you get the people that comment source under anything that challenges their belief. And it's like, okay, I can give you a source for that. Do you really need it to, I mean, to know that looking at artificial light at night is bad, or for eating a banana in the middle of January is not an optimal thing if you live in Canada? I mean, why is that such a difficult thing for people to, I mean, that's the thing that kills me the most. And I'm sure you could talk about this as a farmer. Whenever I post about food, that's one of the most heated, debated topics that people just lose their mind over. And I had a post that kind of went viral a number of months ago, and it was called, it was like a long post explaining why you should not eat a banana in the middle of January. And I tell you what, the amount of anger underneath that post was like, how can people be so angry? And give me a source for that, please. I need a source. And it's like, why do you need a source to know that bananas don't really grow in January if you live in the Northern Hemisphere? Isn't that just common sense,
Yeah. Yeah. The most controversial thing that I've posted on social media this year is that sunlight is not bad for you.
Oh, God. Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah. You know this one for sure. And so many source. And honestly, the vitriol and the aggression behind all this stuff, again, when you get through a lot of the 80-20 of physical health and you're feeling pretty good,
mm-hmm.
and you keep thinking like, okay, what's next? And just having a curious mind, I can't help but to see a place like social media. And like, yes, there's a lot of good that comes from it, but man, there's a lot of, I think, like mental and emotional dysfunction. And it's
mm-hmm.
really, it puts me in a state where it's like very hard to integrate with it. And I'm sure I'll get to a point where I can go back to those environments. But when I was changing my food habits, for example, I would eat well at home and then I would go to some party and there'd be cake there and I'd eat it. And then it became a point where I just don't see it as food anymore.
Right.
It's just doesn't even register in my brain as something I can ingest.
Right.
I think that as far as my mental and emotional and relational health goes, I am making an environment around myself. I'm in this transition phase of like trying to build what I think is like a normal human representation of those sets of health. And going back on devices and social media for me right now is sort of like going to the party and eating and seeing the cake. Where I don't yet have the separation to not eat it and to get into like the the back and
Oh,
forth or whatever.
wow.
And hopefully someday I will. But that's at least how I viewed it right now. It's like I'm trying to establish really clear foundations of myself in those areas that are non-physical health, that I think at the end of the day, you can look at them separately, but they're all the same thing and they sort of are all interdependent of each other. But those are the type of things that I'm trying to optimize for now, which is weird because I want to talk about this stuff and I want to communicate it. But it's like if you were to only be able to communicate about food and healthy food in a McDonald's,
Yeah.
when you're still kind of a food junkie, you know what I mean? It's kind of this weird
Yeah.
transition point.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, it's tough, like that's something I definitely struggle with is like, I put out information online, right? On Instagram and YouTube and podcasts. And it's like, I just am one of those people that I feel like if I'm going to put something out there, I want to interact with the people who are consuming the information, but then drawing those boundaries with yourself of like, man, sometimes like today, I'm like, what is going on with people? Some of the comments I was getting today, I'm like, something's off with people like you just,
Yeah.
and you have that feeling of just in your sympathetic nervous system, you're just kind of like, oh.
So some people can do really well with that. I need to learn. I need to work on that and learn on that. That's one of the things that I'm working on currently, as far as like upgrading myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very violent and abusive childhood, and so I get to like anger really fast, and I can play a pretty good game of online anger and like sharp comments and whatever. And I've just noticed myself like it's just not worth it for me to get into that ring right now. And again, I hope that I get to a point where I can have some sort of healing or whatever. Like, just be frank with myself. Like, I'm not there. I'm not perfect. And it's been hard for me. Like, I try to balance those things out a lot, have space, put my phone on timer and whatever. And I don't know, it hasn't worked that well. So I'm trying to find another way.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things as a creator, as anybody that puts anything out there online, it's just, that's one of the toughest parts of it because it's your work that you're putting out there. And I've finally hired some people to help me behind the scenes to manage some of my stuff, but they're just like, Sarah, we've got this. We've got this. You don't need to check this. And it's still, I don't know if you struggle with that also. It's like, maybe you have some people doing some things for you, but it's, when you work hard to put information out there and you're actually trying to help people, you do kind of want to see how it's being received. And then you can get caught into those, those negative feedback loops.
Yeah. It's a messy game, but
it is. So you have done the whole farming thing. You just mentioned before we started recording, you've just moved to Oregon. So what prompted the move from Texas to Oregon?
My wife and I are planning to have kids soon, and very big decision, very big life change. And as much as I, again, got into farming because I was just very curious about it. And I started being enamored with how we grow food and the food system, and thought there's no way I can talk about this unless I literally do this myself. So I became a farmer, which is very expensive and very time consuming and very stressful, but I love it and had an amazing time and learned a lot of stuff. When it came down to the point of thinking about our family and having a kid, we just really assessed the environment we were in Texas. And I think there's a lot of amazing things about the Austin area and where we were in Bastrop, where our farm was. But living a farm life and having a kid in that, one of the really tough things about, again, thinking about, we live in this zoo cage, we live in a very artificial environment. How do you rebuild that in the modern world? One of the most tragic things about the people who are responsible for providing us food, it's usually one family on 20 to 5,000 acres in the middle of nowhere. This is like one of like the lack of social connection and the isolation is one of the hardest things on farmers. There's, it's kind of switches from year to year, but it's usually at the top of farmers having the profession with the highest amount of suicides. And there's a lot of talk about because debt and because they're under all this type of stuff. And like, yes, that's true. I also think a huge part of that is just because the isolation is so intense. And
Yeah.
you have a lot of connection. It's like it's sort of this weird thing where you trade off connection with people for connection with land and animals in the food system. And yes, you have connection with people because you're selling your food and you're feeding people. And that was one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in my life, of raising animals and produce and feeding our friends and family with that. But every day, waking up and it just being my wife and I out there, like, I love her and she's great and we had some friends close, but humans are very much tribal animals. And this is, again, one of the most artificial things that, like, we would never exist in just two people out in the middle of nowhere making and depending on themselves for absolutely everything. It led to a community effort from help. And so, for example, if I needed help transporting my pigs or something like that, I could depend on somebody, but they're like 35 minutes away and they would come over for a time. So there's an element of dependency that I really appreciate. But living in isolation and thinking about having a kid into that, for us, was a decision we just don't want to make ultimately. Like, there was a lot of other reasons, just about, like, I think our time there was up, and I think that the culture of Austin, Texas has been changing quite a lot. And so we settled on Bend, which is a very small mountain town in Oregon that the total population here is like 100,000 people.
Wow.
And now just over there's this weird thing in America where you either are in some faceless city where you're just a number, or you're in a really broken down rural community that's been gutted from industry, that has taken everybody out, that is impoverished and high in crime, in generations now of people who are sort of down on their luck. And there's not a lot of in between.
Nope.
And it's really unfortunate to see that happen. And I think that there's, and this is a good thing about the internet and Starlink and things like this, where I think that with remote work, we're probably going to have these rural areas be revitalized because people can opt for that. There's not a lot of that going on right now. So we travel around the country to try to figure out, like, how can we have connection to nature in a very extreme way, not live in a big city, but still have a community of people that we resonated with. And we had all these checklists. At the end of the day, we visited here and it just felt like home. Immediately, it was like an intuitive thing of just knowing of, oh, this is now where we should be. And so we tried to, again, like, I'm trying to get way better at not needing to rationalize everything with my intellect of, like, must check this parameter.
Yeah, exactly.
If I did that with my wife, it would have been a very bad outcome. And I think that some of these major things, I think that there's who you spend your time with, so friends, family, what you work on, and where you live are like the three big decisions in life. And honestly, I think that making those decisions with intuition and with your gut, your body has more intelligence than your mind trying to rationalize which of those decisions you should make. And so when we came here, and it was, like, very clear that the decision was made with our bodies instead of our brains, it was an all in. And since then, it's been absolutely incredible. I'm at a stop, like, there's effectively 0 stop signs or stoplights anywhere I go in Bend.
Interesting. I hope you're enjoying today's episode with Dr. Anthony Gustin. Again, all of his information will be linked down in the show notes for you. And I wanted to let you know really quickly, if you are enjoying this content, I have amazing free guides that you can download. Those will be linked in the show notes for you, about how to build your perfect quantum day for optimal circadian health. And as a listener to the show or a watcher of the show, you can always save 10% on any of my courses using the code podcast. So make sure you check those out, linked in the show notes. And if you're enjoying the show, please make sure that you share it with a friend, a family member. And if you have a moment, leave us a comment here on YouTube. It will help to boost this in the algorithm so more people are able to see it and we can get out the good messages that we really try to spread on this channel. Thank you again for watching, and let's get back to the show.
You're basically never in traffic, even though sometimes you get around the car, getting around mostly with bike. Everybody's focused on the outdoors. The type of community vibe that is here is incredible. I could continue to sell Bend for like several hours. I probably shouldn't, because,
people will come.
Yeah. We'll read it, but I'm part of the problem, for sure. Yeah, it's a huge shift for us. And I think that in this journey, it's been really challenging to dive in and have this purpose of like this seeking out what is healthy for me, what's healthy for other people, why are people sick, what's going on, it's giving me into the food system, farming, etc. And just sort of like cut that. And my life has shifted quite a lot over the last couple of months. But really trying to think through this, again, this psychosocial, emotional health, relational health element. I haven't seen a lot of good examples of people reestablishing one of the core things of humanity, which I think is being in a true community in a modern world. And I don't think going out and living in a commune on land is really the answer. I have some friends who have tried it. I have seen examples of it. I do not think it's the answer for a variety of reasons, much like I don't think polygamous relationships are the answer for many reasons. And so I think that the answer has to be like building a beautiful community in sort of a chaotic kind of American or Western city, at least for me, with how I've been brought up. I haven't seen a lot of examples of it. So that's kind of like a thing that I'm thinking a lot about is how do you create that dynamic and create a tribe-like environment in a city, and thinking about that as part of my work right now of like the investigation of how do you build that container. Because I think, again, another one that has been neglected for hundreds of years, if not more, that has ramifications like how people act on social media. Like we have a lot of spillover effect, just like when we eat the wrong food or have the wrong light exposure, we have these physical signs of disease. I think we have a lot of those with the mental, emotional, and spiritual ways because we're not in these cohesive tribes. Emotions can't move. We have no rituals. We have no connection. And so this is one of the things that I'm really focused on currently is how do I build an environment at my home where I have exposure to light and healthy food, access to raw milk, things like that. How do I build an environment where I have people here that are in community within a much broader set of strangers? And it's been a really interesting way to think through how to build from the ground up as we've moved and like sort of started a new life. So that's mostly what I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, I think that what I'm seeing on social media a lot of is people are kind of over glamorizing the homesteading and being off grid and doing all that. And it, for someone who lives in a city the way that I do and surrounded by people, and I'm like, it's like people there, it's everywhere. I want that kind of looks appealing to me to be out in the country and away from people. But my mom grew up actually on a farm. Her parents were farmers. They had an outhouse until she was 18. So like very rural farm. And she couldn't wait to get out. She married my dad, who was not the best choice for her, just to get the hell out of the country, like wanted to be in the city, wanted to be. So I feel like there's got to be some sort of a balance though, like where you do have community, because now, I mean, with my son, I can't, and my daughter too, like we have to have community around us for the kids. We aren't meant to just be in isolation when we have our children. We need them to have community. We need support. Your wife will need support for when she has babies, and we thrive on that. I always say it takes a village. It's like this statement that people throw around all the time, but I really think, I think it's vital for our mental health and emotional health, all of that we do have those supports around us,
Yes. And I think that there is an element of integrating urban and rural cultures that must happen for us to have any choice or chance of this country surviving, or at least like a Western understanding of the world as it operates.
Yeah.
We currently have an urban population that depends entirely on a rural population that has nothing, they don't know anything about each other, and one extracts from the other currently. And if you just go take all the people who give a shit and put them on homesteads and put them on land, and now there's literally no one in the urban area to speak for these people, we're just creating more division. And that's not the answer. And so this is another reason what kind of brought me back into more of an urban environment. Again, comparing, it's like 20th the size of even Austin, which isn't that big of a city, but it's important for me to be somebody in an urban area that is getting people on board with rural ideas and the importance of our food system and the reliance that we have of honestly where we get everything from. It's not just our food. It's literally, if you look around your room, the doors behind you, the paint, everything comes from a rural population somewhere, typically. It comes from the earth. Yeah. And that sort of interdependence, I think, needs to be redone and talked about. And if you just go back to the land, like, no one's going to know. And the whole problem's going to be exacerbated. So I don't know exactly what that looks like. And I've launched a project in Texas called Rooted Local, where we're getting farms connected with consumers, basically like a local butcher box where people are getting food from farmers. But again, we're trying to keep things in a local area, because I don't think that connection, that integration of rural and local economies or in urban economies, like if you're depending on a farmer in New Zealand, you're never going to get that connection point. And then beyond that, we talked when you were on my podcast around the importance of local and seasonal food regardless. And so you're sort of like killing a lot of birds with the same stone here, or whatever. I just butchered that saying, but whatever it is. And that's something that I don't know what's going to look like in Bend, but these are the things that, how do we create community centers on farms that people from the urban areas outside of the cities can go to? How do we get that farm and keep the farm goods local? Whereas a lot of farmers currently, I'm talking to all these regenerative farmers, are shipping all of their stuff across the country, because that's, everybody's buying meat online and shipping it with FedEx and dry ice across the country because local people aren't buying it. It's insane.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. I mean, we've got white oak pastures here in Georgia. I got to go visit them in 2019 for the big, white oak thing with Dr. Saladino. And, then it got popular. Will Harris was on Joe Rogan. And so a lot of people are buying from white oak pastures. Great. But should you really be eating, if you're in Oregon, should you really be eating food from Georgia? It's like how many miles away is that? Like what kind of, and meat has less of an impact as far as being a confusing circadian signal, it's more the plants that have that imprint of the light.
But that's all we know currently.
Exactly.
Maybe in 100 years, we're going to find some other way to measure some energetic thing and go, oh shit, actually when we have food from Oregon, when we live in Georgia, it's like that, this whole thing now is being disrupted, that we don't have a tool to measure currently.
It's true. Yeah. So again, it goes back down to that intuitive space of like, do you need a study to understand geographic differences and seasons and how that actually looks for people? And then not to mention supporting your local economy. That's huge. Everything is so decentralized. You know what I mean? It's just like all over the place. Like you said, paint from different areas and the way we decorate our homes, all of that is just from all over the place. And I think people are so caught up in their devices, in social media, in TV, in the news, and all these things that they can't slow down enough to actually care about this stuff,
Yeah. It's a challenging thing to think about. I mean, this is where, again, my quote unquote health journey has brought me of thinking about the health of the ecosystem in which I inhabit, which I think is the ecosystem of the planet. And I mean, I have gone through periods of just this weird guilt and complicitness of thinking through you have to draw a line somewhere, and there's no perfection. Where the hell does this microphone stand come from?
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean? There's no perfection of it, but I think there's, at least when there's intentionality behind it and you start integrating some of these things. So when I get back to, Paul and I went to stay with the Hadza tribe in Tanzania a couple years ago, and seeing them in the sort of most natural human environment, and no, it's not the same exactly as how it's been the last 50 years. It's already been corrupted by visitors like us, for sure. I understand that. But at the end of the day, these people, there was this felt sense of richness of the human experience that I had been missing entirely, just trying to optimize physical health stuff. Yeah. And this is now like a new North Star for me, and a new reference point that I'm trying to recreate and just bring on all the last 10 plus years that I've been working with physical health stuff as a part of all of that. That can't be ignored. But the story is so much bigger.
Yeah.
And it's how we live. It's how we live in relationship. It's how we live in community. It's how we live, how we use things from the planet. Our relationship to all this stuff is so important, and it impacts our day-to-day experience. And that's really what physical health is at the end of the day. Is that's what I wanted when I was 15, wanting to eat turkey sandwiches. I wanted to change my experience as a human being, and I wanted to have less suffering and have, the story was obviously like, if I was not as fat, maybe I'd have a girlfriend. You know what I mean? At that point. So
yeah,
there's just like, you want to change your experience. And most people, when they're overweight, especially when they're grouped that way, don't have it's like the windshield wipers have been covered for so long that you don't even understand when new things hit the windshield wiper. But once you clean that thing off, you can see clearly and have a new reference point. This is, again, like experiencing what humans should be living like. And it wasn't even like an objective thing that I saw. It was this felt experience of connection and belonging and abundance that I go, oh, that's actually what I've been searching for, again, which is like returning to this natural state, which is why my podcast is called that, of experiencing things as a human in this ecosystem. Again, sounds kind of woo, but this is what we're all looking for. Like, why is everybody searching for these things? I think it's because we have this wisdom that something's missing.
Yeah. And
we're trying to restore it. And what is that missing piece? And I don't think there's a million answers there.
Yeah, I feel like that's why people are just so hung up on like, I need 57 minutes of sauna per week and 11 minutes of the cold therapy. And everyone's kind of looking for this like prescription. And I get that a lot under my post when I talk about light. Well, exactly how many minutes do I need to spend under the sunlight to get these benefits that you're talking about? Like, quantify this for me. And it's like, I feel like you're missing the point.
People are so out of touch with their body and the sensations of their body.
Yeah.
And what emotions feel like, and just what belonging and connection feels like. And this is why I keep coming back to it being a felt sense that I had with this Hadza tribe. Of now, when I'm like in a relationship or meeting a new person, I have this sense of like, there's some incongruency here, or like there's not a match. Like, this doesn't feel good as a relationship. Versus like trying to put it into numbers and data. And that felt sense of what is it like to be alive, and how do I feel day to day, and like, what is my experience? Like, I have that reference point now. Like, how do I feel in this situation?
Yeah.
And our body, again, like, has a lot of information to give us if we tune in and like get connected to that, instead of like solely operating with thinking.
Yeah.
Which I think is great, and it's part of our experience. But would we want to exclude all of the rest of our senses just so we could see? Or would we want to gouge out our eyes just so we could hear better? Of course not. So why are we trying to exclusively think with our brains when we have this other part of intelligence of our body?
Yeah, I agree 100%. So what does all that look like for you on a daily basis? What are some things that you're trying to just bring into your daily routine?
As we move, it's been sort of figuring out a lot of the connection pieces in community. And I think that there's phases in life of, sometimes it's good for a variety of reasons to be in more solitude and to not have as many connections or things going on. And I went through a lot of that over the last like 3 to 5 years, I'd say. Intentionally going into solitude, literally like going to the woods by myself, doing medicine work, things like that, and like working through a lot of stuff. And I just felt for us, our phase of life, family, etc., like I feel like a lot of the work that I need to do to heal some of the things from, again, like an emotional, mental, relational, spiritual sort of aspect are going to be coming in relationship and in a proper community. And so for me, a lot of things of just moving to a new spot are reestablishing connection. And that might sound very ambiguous, and it's because I haven't really got a good way to figure that out yet. But what that looks like is just, I'm looking out, I have this door open in front of me and looking over this amazing nature preserve. And I don't know what any of these plants are named. I don't know how they thrive. I've not been here for a full year. I haven't seen this place in all seasons. Like, there's like a connection to the land that I don't have, that I've been trying. I want to go out and do some like wilderness classes and figure out what the actual land is like here and get connected to it that way. Building actual community here. I'm sort of like thinking about this as this like 3-ring step of Some of our friends moved here at the same time. We've met other people. We're all trying to like live in the same area. I also want to open up. My friend Brian Sanders in Austin did this thing called Sapien Center. And it's kind of like this ancestral health based place. And I'm going to do like my own version of that here, which is like another ring to like start bringing people together. And then we'll probably get land after that and start doing a farming thing, but try to rethink about it in a way like it's not just going to be one family living on a farm. How do we make this a communal thing where people can go out there and participate for a couple months or a year at a time, and like people are coming and going, and there's more people there at a time. So that's kind of like how I'm thinking about it, is like, how do I establish and reestablish connection here to the land, like meeting farmers, going and getting all my local food places set up, trying to figure out my routines with people and community. So this is like the biggest thing that I focused on, like recreating a human environment here, because the rest of this stuff is like, it's so obvious to me now after doing it for 15 years, what a normal food environment looks like. And it's getting obvious to me, more obvious now from help from people like you, of like what a normal light environment is like. And those things are like fairly easy. But the challenge is how do you create that local environment of community and tribe? And I have no answers at this point. Like I have a bunch of hypotheses that I'm testing, and like again, it's like this is why I'm opening up space myself, because like I said, I need to do the thing and like become an expert on it to figure out all the working parts, or else I just like I gloss over it. And so having to be the person who builds a functioning community here that is a community of abundance is something that I'm like, fuck, I have to do this.
I love that. I mean, I love that. I think it's so important for us to think about that. And then just thinking about a community of abundance, I think some people, they live from this place of lack. And I did that for most of my life, growing up super poor. I was also super overweight, had a ton of health challenges. And so getting to that place where you can get into that abundance mindset, that's something that I'm really passionate about sharing with other people and helping people kind of open up in that way. How do you think you got to, just talking about your history and everything you've been through, to that place where you can hold that abundance mindset?
So the thing that I think is the most tragic about living as a human in 2023 is how much we have to psychologically hold these concepts in our head and manage them independently.
Yes.
And so when you have the thing of, we need to get sun, we need to get red light, we need to get less blue light, we need to get this thing, we need to sleep this way, and sleep equals shut the curtains and temperature at this and take the supplement, or what you don't eat here. There's like 18 million things you have to manage. And I want to find as many constraints and environment things in life where I stop thinking about that. And I think that living as doing a life as a farmer, and that chapter was clear, like how many things that immediately fixed in my environment. When it comes to this thought about abundance, one of the craziest things I experienced with the Hadza was that even though they're now going 20 miles, we had to hike 20 miles to kill one baboon to feed tribe.
Wow.
We came back and we passed berry bushes and root vegetables and these trees with fruit, baobab fruit on it. And they had, when they ate, there was no scarcity. It was of abundance. And I think that the reason why they had that is because everybody had skills that they knew that they could depend on everybody that they knew. If I go out with my friends in the woods right now, we're dead in 3 days. We're done. No one can make a shoe. No one can make a bow and arrow. No one knows how to make a trap. No one knows how to where to get water from. And I think that that's a part of modern society, of this abstraction of dependence that leads to insecurity that people aren't talking about. And
oh, wow. Yeah.
You can have, we work now on our computers and get this money and then use the money to buy things from strangers to depend on survival from. And the Hadza don't have to do that. They can literally just depend on the skills of the people that they've grown up with their entire life. So they're like, okay, if we need this thing, this guy's got it. If we need this woman can do this. And I think that fosters a natural mentality of abundance and safety. which is a
Yeah.
core thing that humans have had throughout all of human history, or at least tried to optimize for safety. And I think that no matter what now, COVID showed us, and I think that it stimulated a lot of fear. I think a lot of that
Yes.
fear became from like, what happens if the fucking trucks stop showing up to the grocery store?
Right.
And I think some people finally thought about that for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
You can put all the frozen food in your fridge, but what happens if the power gets cut off to that?
Right.
Like there's so many things like this that I think that we have these broken connections to. And I don't think that we can get back to perfection. And I don't recommend that we try to reestablish living as a hunter-gatherer society and go out in the woods and I'm living with this tribe and everybody knows how to make medicines. Like it's not going to happen. But the question is, how can you approximate that in a way where you don't have to think about it so much? It's like there's a spectrum of, right now for me, it looks like journaling and gratitude and thinking about a lot of these things and giving my time away to people who need it. Like these things foster abundance in me, but there's still more things that I have to manage. On the other side of it, it's having this true dependence on other people for things. And so how I'm trying to rework that in the local community here is actually helping my friends with things. Which sounds crazy. I got into trouble on Twitter last year, I think, because somebody had a tweet saying like, never help your friends with moving. This is the most ridiculous, like hire movers. And I was like, actually, there's like, it's good to depend on people for things. And this is kind of like the root I'm getting to of once you start depending, like that's what a community is. Most people have a community defined as friends like them. And that's what a lot of the Austin quote unquote communities were about, was just people with the same lifestyle. They were what my wife's dad calls a lifestyle enclave. It's not a community. A community is something that is about something greater than you, that you have to depend on other humans for survival and for maintenance of that thing. And so how do you do that in a modern world? I don't have great answers right now, but I want to go out, help local farms, for example. Want like a friend's child, like they need to go out for a date, instead of them getting a babysitter, we're going to watch the kids. So this element of like, hey, if I need something, I'm not going to go to a stranger and use money to do that. I'm going to develop skills that I can offer my community, that I'm going to work in relationship with them, and then they're going to offer me skills, and we're going to work like that. And so we'll see if that works to help reduce my need to hit my 5 journaling points and gratitude a day and all these type of things. Like, I don't know. Again, like I'm a novice here, and it's also not lost to me that most people in this country are in survival mode, especially right now after COVID. And so I'm grateful and very lucky to be in a position to be able to think about these things. And I don't think that stuff's worth thinking about unless if you're in survival mode. Like if you're listening to this podcast and you have a life where it's really hard for you to just get real food and be outside and have time and like have low stress because you have financial debt, all these type of things. This is all downstream stuff. Yeah. And again, I think it's another tragic part of how we live our lives. Like most people are born into this. So it sounds like the same as you. Like I was born into a pretty poor family. I was born into obesity. I was born into like all these stories and narratives that I've had to bust through over the last 25 years. Exactly. And it hasn't been easy.
Yeah. That's the thing.
But the journey never stops. It's like, this is like just my version of where I'm at. I'm not expecting at any point that people need to like drop their jobs and just be in community and live in some utopia. That's not my expectation.
Right. I think the biggest thing that stands in people's way is that they argue for their limitations. And that's, I don't know if you feel that way, but that's one of the most frustrating things for me as a creator is when I put out a post and people want to argue, well, I can't do that because of this, and I can't do that because of this and this and this. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I understand. There were times just in the last 10 years where we had no money in the bank. You know, we couldn't make the payments. We have a disabled child just going to live with us forever. Like, I understand hard times, but there comes a point where you have to have this mindset shift and things can change. You're not stuck where you're at. And that's maybe sounds a little bit harsh to some people, again, who are living in survival mode, but I truly believe that we can break out of these constraints, that a lot of it does start with gratitude. That's one thing. I got to do gratitude before I get out of bed every morning. Like there's small steps that you can take. that you can make these changes, you know?
Yeah, I mean, this is another thing about. I think that the internet has a lot of perils to it, and I think it's caused a lot of issues for humans. But I also think that being born into a society where we need to make money to survive and to have the ability to live like a human, like it costs a lot of money to live like a human should. Like all the things that used to be free, we need to pay money for, which is insane. And to have a life where you can go outside and be in the sunshine in the middle of the day requires a lot of fucking effort. And that is something that the internet can provide people with a freedom of income to be able to live this life, which I think is as close to magic as humanly possible. I wouldn't be able to have the life I have without the internet.
Same.
And that's one thing that I think that we have this ridiculous hustle culture online, and I think people are now just like making money to make money and to exploit people. And like, yes, there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of bad players, but the fact that anybody can throw up a social media thing and do an online course or whatever, and then get some income coming in and create some more freedom and stability to their life. Like, this is another thing I think that we shouldn't have to manage it, but we do. And the tools are becoming easier and easier and easier. And I think that's a pretty beautiful thing.
Agree. 100% agree. Awesome. Well, this has been such a really wonderful conversation. What is next for you if there's nothing that we didn't cover?
I don't know. I need to, I'm still digging into all the stuff that you're talking about. And so I'm learning a lot about that as well. So again, appreciate all the stuff you're doing there. But yeah, I think I still write my newsletter occasionally and then continue the podcast. And then hopefully I'll have the emotional bandwidth to be able to jump back on social media at some point. Yeah, just again, just trying to show for people that like the challenges in life and the journey like just doesn't stop. Problems change and life changes, but you just got to keep moving forward, I think.
Yeah. We always say like, just when you figure out the answer, the question changes.
Yeah.
It's just life. Right. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, I'll put all of your links and information down in the show notes so my people can go and follow you. But thank you so much for coming on today. I've been a fan of your work for a really long time. And so it's been such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.